Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome back. We're glad you're here this week. We are back in 1 Kings chapter 18. We had left off with a pretty big story last week. Do you remember what it was, Peter? Peter forgot. It was about Elijah. And he was on the top of the mountain with the prophets of Baal. And that's right, they wanted rain to come down. And they also wanted fire to consume their altars. So the prophets of Baal tried to get their God's attention, tried to get Baal's attention that's right, he didn't hear them because he's not real, boys and girls. There's only one God. And that's the God that Elijah followed. And the God that you and I should be following as well, boys and girls. Well, if you remember Elijah, when he went to do it, well, maybe we should back up a little bit. Right now, it's a time of famine in the Bible. Do you remember what a famine is? Yeah, they were really hungry. That's right, Peter. They hadn't had rain to water the crops, and they were starving, boys and girls. There was very little water. And that's why kind of all this sort of contest came about, because they needed rain. Well, the prophets of Baal, they did all sorts of things. They could not get their altar to start on fire by their God. Okay, they weren't allowed to start it themselves. But before Elijah did it, he did something kind of crazy, boys and girls. He poured water, buckets and buckets of water on top of the altar. And we talked about if you do that, usually things don't start on fire, right? We use water to put fire out. But he did that, boys and girls. He prayed to God. And God started, put fire to the sacrifice. God, our Heavenly Father, did that. Well, boys and girls, where we leave off was right there in 1 Kings chapter 18. So now we're kind of doing like the little bit of a conclusion to that story that we didn't have time to get to last week. So starting in verse 41, and Elijah said unto Ahab, Get thee up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of abundance of rain. So Ahab was the king at this time, boys and girls, and Ahab had been mad at Elijah because of the lack of rain. He said it was his fault when really it was the sin of the people for following Baal. So he says, go ahead, you can eat, you can drink, because the rain is coming. We are going to have plenty. There's going to be an abundance of rain. So Ahab leaves, he goes to eat and drink. It tells us that in verse 42. And Elijah goes back up on top of Mount Carmel. And it says he casts himself on the earth and he puts his face between his knees and he prays and he talks to God. Then in verse 43, he says to his servant, all right, go up now. Go and look toward the sea. And he went up and looked. There is nothing, he said. And Elijah told him to go 7 times. So Elijah prays for rain. He sends his servant to go look. His servant goes, he looks. No rain. So he comes back, he tells Elijah. Elijah's like, all right, go up 7 times. I was kind of thinking about this as I was walking down here, boys and girls, why he didn't just tell him to wait 20 minutes or something like that. But he physically had to walk up there 7 times to look. And if God told him to do it, what do you think is going to happen on the 7th time, boys and girls? Yeah, what do you think happened on the first 6? Nothing. Absolutely nothing on the first 6. This poor servant's getting his workout in. But he goes up there 6 times, nothing. He goes up the 7th time. And verse 44 says, and it came to pass on the 7th time. By the way, boys and girls, that means the servant obeyed. The servant did it 7 times. Even though he didn't see anything the first 6, he still obeyed and went the 7th time. That he said, behold, there ariseth a little cloud out of the sea, like a man's hand. And he said, go up, say unto Ahab, prepare thy chariot, and get thee down, that the rain stop thee not. So he goes up the 7th time. He comes back. The rain cloud's only about the size of a man's hand, okay? My hands are not that big. But imagine a cloud that big, okay? That's not a very big cloud, right? But yet Elijah knows that the rain is going to come, and that's a sign. He says, all right, you go tell Ahab. Tell him the rain is coming. God is sending it. The cloud is there. And he basically says, hurry up so the rain doesn't stop you from getting home. Hurry up so the rain doesn't cause you trouble to get home. Verse 45, And it came to pass in the meanwhile that the heaven was black with clouds and wind, and there was a great rain. And Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. That cloud that was the size of a hand turned into a mighty storm, boys and girls. We had quite a bit of rain this summer, well, towards the end of the summer, just before school started. I can't imagine after having not seen rain for such a long time and then seeing so much rain at once, the power that it shows God had and how happy the people must have been. Verse 46, and the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he girded up his loins and ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. So Ahab is in a chariot, and he is trying to get back to Jezreel, and Elijah's on foot. And the Lord helps him to run so fast, he actually beats the chariot, he beats the horses back to the entrance of Jezreel, and he's there when Ahab gets there. Boys and girls, a couple things we can see from this. God was with Elijah. The mighty power on his life is just incredible. From his prayer bringing the fire down from heaven to his prayer bringing the rain, God was with Elijah. It told us that in verse 46, from giving him the power to run faster than horses. Elijah obeyed, and also the servant obeyed. Both of them show us the importance of obedience, obeying God in what he says. They obeyed, and God took care of them. God looked out for them. Boys and girls, never take for granted the importance of obedience. It is so important, whether it's the little things or the big things, boys and girls. Whenever I tell people about how I got my job where I am, I always bring it back to the fact that I just obeyed. It's what my parents thought I should do, and even as a young adult, I obeyed them, and God used my parents to bring me where I am, to be teaching where I am. And the importance of obedience, you don't just learn that as an adult, boys and girls. It starts when you're a kid. You learn to obey mom and dad. You follow what mom and dad say. You get their wisdom as you get older. And if you simply obey and you're in the practice of obeying, God's will isn't some big scary thing about what you should do with the rest of your life. It's doing day by day what you should, one step at a time. Or as the song says, little by little, inch by inch. Boys and girls, we want to obey in the tiny things so we're in a habit when it comes to the big things. This week, as you go about your week, think of Elijah, think of his servant, and doing something 7 times over. If mom asks you to clean your room a couple times because you don't get it right the first time, do it right the first time. But if you don't, have patience and do it right until it's mom approved.